was able to stop screwing myself over in my head, which is where most of us fail before we even begin. If we don't question if our thoughts are even real, then we're going to be living in a sort of false reality that for most of us is unnecessarily negative. And while our lives might actually be generally good, all of that potential could be wasted because of the way it's perceived and filtered in our minds. What I'm going to share in today's episode of Consider This has taken me 10 years to process and learn. So basically, this discussion will save you 10 years of work. So what is it that people who live outside of their heads do that you might not? I have found that a life of mental clarity and strength follows 4 simple rules. This video will walk you through them all. So back in 2015, I was dating my then boyfriend, now husband, and both of our families fall under the same political and religious umbrellas. And so because of that, I assumed that his parents would be like my parents. And in general, they would act the same, have the same values and morals and all these types of things. But when I would hang out at their house, I would frequently find myself alone in a room. And even my husband would go and leave the room just to do something else. I don't know, they just kept going on with their day and I wasn't really included. At the time, I would have said it just bothered me and it annoyed me. And I did talk to my husband about it back then and ask him, please don't leave me behind. But working through it now, I realized that it made me feel unvalued and generally disliked by his family. And it's because my family expresses love through quality time. And you can see how being left alone in a room, you're not spending any time with people, and it just hurt my feelings. And until I learned to accept and realize that other people have different values, which is one of the 4 rules, this unnecessary hurt continued to hinder my relationship with my in-laws for a very long time. And this way of thinking affected all areas of my life, and it probably affects yours too. So what's the problem? Why are we screwing ourselves over mentally? The thing is that people believe their perception of the world, their assumptions, and their emotions to be truth. The truth of the world. People say all the time these days, well, that's your truth and I have my truth and blah, blah, blah. But it's we need to realize that truth is outside of ourselves, which is a good thing. Because it means that we don't have to rely on our negative perception or negative feelings to say, hey, life is negative. Life can be positive even though we feel a certain way, and we can work through that. And I'm not talking about things that are obviously negative. Jerks exist. People who name call aren't pleasant, But when our minds are like a runaway horse that we just hold on to, we only go where the horse takes us. And it's not honestly a very good place. And the most common thing that drives this runaway horse style mind is underlying anxiety, which can manifest itself in a variety of ways. Some of the common ones are excessive worrying. Now, there's a difference between worrying, which is a negative emotion that doesn't actually solve problems, and having caution, because caution is a way of action, a way of moving forward, and worry doesn't actually help a situation if it is a little bit dangerous or something like that. I tell my 2-year-old daughter that crying does not solve problems, neither does whining, and neither does worrying. People who excessively worry think I need to check my alarm again for the 5th time because if I'm late for work, then I might get fired, and that would ruin my life plans. Things are just taken way out of proportion. Another example of how we screw ourselves over in our heads is perfectionism. This is a prison for oneself, and it's surprising to know that perfectionism is actually driven by fear, because these people are very critical of themselves, but they can't really face criticism from other people. That's why they tend to be very defensive, and they're not very teachable, so they're kind of stuck in their current state, not really learning and accepting other people's perspective. Perfectionist people think well, if you don't want to worry about making other people upset and making mistakes, then you need to work harder to become more perfect and make better plans, which is just such a stressful mindset. People who really struggle to make decisions and stand firm in what they want also express this kind of anxiety. They tend to be people-pleasing, which leaves them feeling shoved under the rug and unfulfilled in themselves because they spend most of their time trying to make other people happy, when their desires and needs are also just as valid as everyone else. Sometimes for these people, making adult decisions that are completely independent and theirs to make are influenced by the fear that like a parent won't approve or some crazy awful thing might happen, so they are just locked down in their fear. People like this think, well, I don't want to order that sandwich because it might taste awful, and then I'll beat myself up for it the rest of the day because that would have been a mistake. Another way we screw ourselves over in our minds is to be excessively controlling of ourselves and others. These people do the exact same thing every week or try to stick as closely to their schedule as they can so that things are predictable and they know like this will go right because it has before and I'll be safe. These people tend to kind of flip out when the plans change or something does go wrong. They have a type A personality and often think there's only one way to do things. There's a right way and we have to do it this way or it'll all fall apart. These people might think, well, if I don't write down this menu and find ingredients for my shopping list before I go shopping, then we're not going to have anything to eat all week. Take a second to think, did any of these types of anxiety resonate with you, and do you have a tendency for like perfectionism or not being bold in your decisions? Or you could have a mixture of several of them. And if that's the case, then that's great because you're in the right place. Let's get into actually solving this anxiety. So in order to live a life of mental clarity and strength, I try to follow these 4 simple rules as much as I can. Obviously, I'm not perfect, but I just try to remind myself of them and apply them to as many situations as possible. Rule number 1 is to remember that other people have different values. This seems really obvious, like we know that people have different hobbies and they like different colors. And you know, you can kind of take a second to think of all the ways that people are different than you and then apply that to the way they process people or the world or what's important or emotions. And it's like, it's just as different inside of their minds, which we don't see, as it is externally. So people communicate love differently in the same way they communicate disrespect differently. So if I feel disrespected by someone, I need to take a second and like pause. Yeah, sure, I feel disrespected. Okay. But did they try to be disrespectful? Or are they just acting in a way that's normal to them and it's not normal to me and it's not in accordance to my values? Like, is it intentional on their part or not? Because even if we have this feeling, it doesn't necessarily mean they disrespect us. Because you can make someone feel disrespected without, like in your own heart, disrespecting them. Respect is a heart posture. And it just isn't always accurately communicated through actions and through different people's lenses. This is why when we're talking to someone, we say something that is so clear in our own like mouth and brain, and then they hear it and totally say something we didn't mean or perceive something we did mean in it. And then like I'm usually like, I speak English. I don't know why you're thinking I said that. I did it. But it's because of the way they think and all of their history and potential trauma. And, you know, it's just like, it's so difficult to actually accurately communicate to people. But it's something to work on. It's so freeing because you don't have to claim so many negative emotions as actually being reality, because a lot of people can hurt people's feelings unintentionally. And I see this a lot, like a lot of neurotypical people. Not that I'm not neurotypical, but they make assumptions about people's intentions. Like somebody might be rude and my husband is like, oh, they're just being blah, 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 and they hate me. I don't even know what he might say, but I try to say like, maybe they literally have had a breakup yesterday, or they're sick today at work, or like there's so many things going on outside of ourselves. I'd really encourage you and everyone to stop making assumptions about people's intentions, especially negative ones. Like if you're going to assume something about someone, then assume the positive. And this way of thinking kind of speaks to the problem of having or trying to have excessive control over others, because you're trying to like put your stamp on their actions and intentions and their whole personality. And it's like, let them be them. Like, I don't know why they're acting mean to me. And it doesn't validate their actions. They still need to have a good attitude if they're having a bad day. You just don't have to internalize the fact that they are having a bad day. And I'm just going to say this. I don't know if anyone's ready to hear it, but it comes across as kind of self-centered when you take everyone's actions and think that like, well, it's about me. Because it's probably not. There's a lot going on in the world besides us. And when we realize that, it can kind of take us off our pedestal, which we might not want to do initially. But it's just so so freeing because you just don't have to claim the negativity. The second rule I learned in order to stop screwing myself over mentally is to manage my expectations. I see a lot of people putting a lot of weight into things that don't really matter, and I realize that because they put weight into it, now it matters to them, and that's something you'll have to identify and work through on your own. But the less you put into something, emotionally speaking, the less it can rock your boat. And if your hope is set in Jesus, then, plans being messed up or dinner getting burnt or I don't even know, something happening that's negative won't rock your boat as much because Jesus has already won our victory on the cross, right? And it is still a problem to be addressed. You still have to work through plans that are messed up, but you don't necessarily have to have all the negative emotion behind it that a lot of people do. And this kind of gets into dwelling on a hopeful / better future. That tends to ruin the present because we're never enjoying it for what it is. And also it kind of leads to a letdown a lot of the time because it doesn't happen. Earth kind of sucks. I'm not saying that your way of thinking is going to change reality. That is oftentimes difficult. I'm just saying if you don't rely on reality being hopeful, being better, and all these things that are out of your control, then it won't mess with you so much. For instance, I was at a movie night and we were talking in the dark. It was kind of nice. Just about deeper things after the movie ended, and I was surprised to hear there was 3 other people in the room, and they were all talking about how they had asked God about their future, to reveal certain things to them, and when he didn't do that, they got mad at God. And I'm not saying I'm surprised they got mad at God. Who hasn't been mad at God, But I was just surprised to hear that they would ask him about their future because it just isn't something that I've ever thought of doing. Because the way I think of it is as a Christian, God is our Father, right? And he's a good Father. So if he's going to say I've got your future under control, which he does, it's the same as a mom saying, I packed your lunch. As a kid, you're not going to worry about it. You're not going to say, well, what did you pack? Is it enough food? I need to see my lunchbox right now. As a kid, you're just great, Mom, thanks. And then you get on the bus. You don't worry about it. So if we do have this trust in God that he's even better than earthly parents, then we shouldn't be challenging what he says. We shouldn't be asking, oh, well, let me double check what you have planned for my future so that I can approve it or not. And that whole idea of surrendering your future to God really frees everything up because maybe he wants something bad to happen so you learn a valuable lesson. A lot of the times, my life lessons have been learned through negative experiences. But if he told us, you're going to go through this, we'd be I don't want to go through that, but we need to trust him and trust the process. And that will give us some freedom to not worry and to manage our own expectations and just say, hey, God, I'm going to give it to you. The third rule is to define yourself by your character and the Word of God. Let me just be frank. I don't even get self-hate thoughts in my head. I was trying to think of some to share with you guys in the video, and it's if I do get them, I'm instantly well, that's wrong. And honestly, I feel the demons gave up. That's one thing. I think a lot of people think when they hear self-hate thoughts, they think it's themselves saying it to themselves. But I imagine that demons take opportunity to say negative things to us all the time. So send those thoughts back to hell. And from what I've seen, a lot of people identify who they are and what they're worth and just their identity in the way that people treat them, which we shouldn't do. Obviously, it's difficult not to, but we should never internalize other people's negative behavior because their reaction is their responsibility. The saying is hurt people, not hurt people hurt losers who deserve it. For instance, I've been cheated on, and that sucks, and there's a lot of pain tied to it. That's just normal. You have to work through things. But I never thought, he cheated because I'm not worth loyalty or love, and I'm ugly. I always tried to keep my mind thinking he cheated because he has trauma that needs to be dealt with, and he has a hole in his life, and he's trying to fill it through sex. And obviously I didn't do that. But again, it goes back to not taking your feelings of hurt and like, oh, he doesn't love me, which he didn't, but it's like, that doesn't mean I don't deserve love. He made a mistake because of his problems. But being able to think that like, oh, that person has problems, or he's got trauma that he's dealing with this way. I also have trauma that I deal with in other bad ways. It's just not cheating on someone. So being able to separate yourself from other people's bad decisions is so freeing. And this does tie into people who struggle to make decisions because a lot of their decisions are tied to, you know, oh, what if I get a negative response from other people? Then they're going to be mad at me and I guess that I'm going to be a mean person because I made them feel angry. Or just all these labels and second guessing, and it's like, you know, don't claim it. You don't have to claim the negativity. I'm not saying just disregard how everyone feels and just be selfish, but it's like some people are ridiculous and you don't have to claim their ridiculousness. Or there's a whole bunch of adults who don't take ownership of what they want and then they're mad when you don't spoon feed it to them. Like, it's not your problem. It's not your job. The fourth and final rule I followed to stop mentally screwing myself over is to claim my weakness. And listen up, please, because you probably need to hear this. It is okay to be human with specific points of talent and also specific points of weakness. We aren't perfect, and we all say that, but then, like, when you fail, are you beating yourself up? Why? You know you're not perfect. Failure is the path to success. There's no way to get better without failing a whole bunch. And that is what perfectionists don't realize. They're just so uncomfortable with the idea of failure. And it's like, failure grows you. Failure is your friend, especially when you actually analyze it, take it to heart, and think, how can I do this better? How can I improve? Failure is a very good tool. If you want to learn how to capitalize on failure and rejection and heartbreak and all that negative stuff, you can watch my other video. But God tells us in our weakness, He is strong. So especially if you're a Christian, failure is in no way a negative thing. Failure sometimes is a way for God to get you to step out of the way so He can act in your life and affect you and other people. There's a quote by Oswald Chambers that says this: although we have forsaken God, it has not altered God. Never interpret God as changing with our changes. He never does. There's no variableness in Him. Is variableness a word? Probably. I just never heard it. But it's so true that God doesn't change. And it could hurt His feelings that we fail or something, but He's not going to abandon you. There's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. So these 4 rules are the goal, but we really have to break them down into a checklist of actionable steps that we can apply to our everyday routine to establish new ways of thinking and new habits. But first, if this video has been helpful to you, please give it a like and consider subscribing. So in general, these 4 rules really require us to think about what we're thinking about. So many times we just feel and flow with what we already perceive and what we already think, but we should always question that and seek to improve on those thoughts, which takes just literally thinking about them initially. So here's a humongous list of things we can do to actually incorporate these 4 rules into our life. Okay, so how can we realize other people have different values than us and actually put it into practice? So if you have close people in your life, friends or family that you trust, then you can literally just ask them, like, why do you do certain things, so that you might be able to understand their values and their ways of thinking and get an idea of how people think differently than you. You can also pay attention and analyze past situations and try to think of, like, okay, this is what happened, but why did it happen? I know my side of the story. Like, what are possibilities that could have played into the other sides of the story? What could have been miscommunicated or misconstrued? I'd also encourage you to get educated about personality types. There's a whole ton of tests, but the Enneagram represents 9 different personality types. We know there's 5 different love languages. There's get it rights, there's get alongs, there's get it dones, and get appreciated. And all of these different personality types represent ways of thinking, ways of processing things, priorities, emotions. People are so diverse. It's crazy and kind of daunting, but we'll work on it. Next is, how can we manage expectations from the day-to-day situations? You can ask yourself what really matters in a given situation. Like if you know you're going to go camping or you're going to host a barbecue, you can think through, okay, I want this to be really special. Well, what makes it special? Is it the tableware? Is it the menu? Is it who's invited, or the games, or whatever? And whatever it may be, you can put yourself in charge of that portion of it so that you know it's done the way you like it. And just let the other stuff go, you know? Don't worry about it. You can write down on one side of a piece of paper what is in your control regarding any situation, and then on the other side what's outside of your control, just to put into perspective how many things are probably going to take place that you can't control and you shouldn't worry about or let affect you. Also, just check your hope. Is your hope in Jesus and just the general enjoying yourself and doing the right thing, or is it in silly stuff? Like everything appearing to be perfect, or one specific person having a good time, in which case they might just be in a bad mood. Don't put yourself in that situation. How can we define ourselves by our character and the Word of God? Most people wouldn't say this part, but it's kind of applicable, and so many of us miss it. Like, if we're going to define ourselves by our character, then we should make sure we're doing good, moral, reputable things and have a good character. We also should be reading the Bible daily, and not only that, but like really repeating and hanging on the truth of God's word. The fact that God came to die for specifically you, and he calls us each by name. He knows your name. He has written down your life. You are so important. And the parable of the talents, it's like, if we serve God, then we're his servants in that parable, and he has given us each literally talents that we can use in a unique way to serve his kingdom. And even if your dad thinks your art is stupid, he just has a poor perspective, and you can still use your art to do God's will, which is way more important than your dad's will here on earth. We can also catch those put downs we have in our minds, whether they are from ourselves or demons or what have you, and rework them and say, no, that isn't the case, and I shouldn't think that way. And then not only that, but really think, why did I just say that? Or why do I believe that? And think through situations that may have brought you to believe that, and consider if you should claim that label on yourself or not. And in most cases, you shouldn't. Because if you think of it, creation can't really label itself. You know, if someone makes a ball, the ball doesn't say, I'm a ball and my name is George. The creator does. The creator says what it's for and what it does and its purpose and gives it value. So God is the one who gives you value and purpose and your labels, and you are not really allowed to label yourself. It's also important to have good intentions, because even if we do fail or hurt other people or mess something up, we can still at the end of the day say, this happened because I'm human and I need saved by Jesus, not because I intentionally was trying to be mean or I intentionally was, manipulative or something like that. So you can walk away with more peace in your own heart, even though like stuff still sucks because of your actions. You don't have to think of yourself negatively. You can also pray to believe what God has said about you. I mean, he's here to help you. He loves you. He wants these things for you. Just blatantly saying, God, like, I don't know how to believe this stuff. Can you help me? Is a great thing to do. And also, this is so basic, but it's really difficult. Distance yourself from people who put those labels on you. It's one thing to have people lovingly, even if they're in error, but they lovingly criticize you and try to help you be better, even if, they're kind of just not understanding the situation, versus people who just say, well, you are this because you acted this way and that's how I perceive you, because it shows you that they aren't willing to look at other perspectives, and they think that they're all-knowing, and it's just not helpful. So if you have someone who continually, repeatedly does that without any improvement or teachability, consider just like distancing yourself and protecting yourself, because you don't need that. And that whole idea ties into having boundaries with people, and there's a whole book on it you can read. I've read it. It's great. But it just teaches how to have boundaries that are healthy and protect yourself, because a lot of people struggle having boundaries because it comes across as like being harsh or mean, because the people you set boundaries with don't necessarily like it, but it's actually really good to do. And how can we accept our weakness? First of all, I want to say this is not the same as identifying an area where you need to grow and saying, well, that's just my personality, I guess, and like not doing anything about it. Progress should always be the goal. But we should also expect some margin of error, especially in places where we haven't had a lot of practice, or just like places of weakness. We're going to have those, and we're going to mess up. We can learn to soak in failure. A lot of us try to, like, yeah, of course we do it, but then we push it under the rug and move past it, don't ever think about it. But it's really helpful to analyze it and not just be sad or cry. Actually think of, how can it serve me in the future? How can I avoid this in the future? How can I be better? Solve that problem that we just experienced, so that next time we face it, we will have a solution ready to go. We should also just believe what God says. And He says that all have fallen short of the glory of God. We all deserve to go to hell. We all suck. And if you believe that, then it's kind of, again, you got to step off your pedestal to believe that, but it's so freeing, because it's like, oh, it's okay for me to suck, because Jesus doesn't. That's why He came, and He washed me in His blood, and I'm clean, even though I still suck. And that ties into having yourself stop being your own hero and really having Jesus be your hero. Seeing yourself for what you are and who you are and your sinful inclinations can help you stop trying to be something you're not. We're never going to be perfect. You can also write down your apparent weaknesses and just like come face to face with it. Really solidifies it, brings it into your face, and makes it so you have to think about it. And if you're brave enough, then you can ask one of your close friends or relatives, like, so, are there areas you think I can be better in general? And like, have other people identify your areas of weakness. I mean, it's definitely scary to do that, but if you have the oomph in ya, it can be really helpful, as long as they do it in a loving, helpful way. So ask the right person. Also, read a book. Like, okay, so you have this weakness. Like, for instance, myself, I am an introvert, and I come across as like, stay away from me is my general vibe in a group of people. And at the same time, I want to have friends. I want to have more friends. I want to be better at just like talking to people, making friends, and connecting. And I know that I struggle with that. So I read How to Make Friends and Influence People. It's a very well-known book, but it's been helpful and great. And if you have a weakness that you want to improve on, then find a book about it. Other people don't have that weakness and they want to help you. You can also remind yourself daily that with Jesus, literally everyone is perfect and would be perfect. So if you have Him, then you don't necessarily need to feel super horrible about being a human like the rest of us. He's got your back. And finally, just genuinely try your best all the time, because like I said earlier, if you can say you had good intentions and you tried your best, that's literally all you can do. So you can still be proud of yourself in the face of failure because you tried. A bonus rule for how to stop screwing yourself over mentally is to practice gratitude. And you can practice gratitude really easy by grabbing my weekly gratitude reflection worksheet in the description. So now that I've learned these 4 rules and apply them to my daily situations, my relationship with my in-laws, even just in my own head, has drastically improved. Now when I'm over there and they leave me alone in a room, I don't internalize it and say, oh, they don't value me, because I've realized that they don't communicate love through quality time. It's through gift giving, just because they're a different family. And yeah, I still feel the most loved when I have quality time with people, but having the ability to remind myself that people aren't trying to hurt my feelings, and people are still trying to show me love through ways I don't necessarily feel it, is still meaningful. And it still shows good intentions on their part. And we should never think that people who are different are necessarily wrong. So being able to apply these 4 rules and take a step back from my own presumptions has allowed me to be able to accept their love through the ways they choose to show it, even though it's not my preference. And in this same way, in all areas of my life, I'm able to accept so much more love and happiness from people through the way it's given to me instead of the way that I want it. So I'm able to live an overall more positive life in general. I hope learning these 4 rules is gonna make your life more positive and just get you to stop screwing yourself over in your head like I used to. But if you found this video to be helpful, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. I'll see you next time. When we actually go through the book, I talked about how to make friends and influence people, and I just share what it has done for my life. Thanks for watching.